This is Deep Level Healing.
So we want to introduce the whole area of inner healing, or what I like to call deep level healing. And this outline from this lesson on follows the chapters in the book Deep Wounds, Deep Healing. So we've got that resource also. I'd like to start with a verse in Philippians 3 that is frequently misused. And I don't mean to criticize people for misusing the verse, because a lot of us really don't know. And we look at a verse like Philippians 3:13. It says, "The one thing I do is to forget what is behind me and do my best to reach what is ahead." Now, I think as we read a verse like that, we have to ask just what is it that the Apostle Paul is saying that we should forget. And the take that many people have on it is, well, he wants us to forget these bad things that have happened to us. We've all had all kinds of experiences. How many of you have ever been hurt emotionally? And people say things, people do things, from our parents to our friends to our teachers to our spouses to whoever, and we all end up with these hurts. Now, what if you had a little bandage on your body for every time you've been hurt emotionally? What would you look like? See, because each of these hurts is like a wound. It's almost like somebody took a knife and just slashed us. Well, what we do is when these wounds happen to us, it's not nice to act like a baby. See, when a baby is hurting, we used to have diapers and pins, and now they don't bother with the pins, which is probably good. But every once in a while, a pin would open and the baby would scream and holler because baby's hurting. Well, when you get to be an adult, that's not nice. That's not appropriate. A lot of times we get hurt and we want to scream and holler, but we're grown-ups, so we don't do that. Instead, we slap. It's like we slap a bandage on the wound without any antiseptic. And if we've got all these wounds, we've slapped the bandages on. For a lot of us, those wounds are still very open. And it's like they're festering under the bandage. They're getting infected without the antiseptic, and so this is the way our lives get lived. Now, when we accept Christ, well, for one thing, our hopes are often built up. How many of you heard you accept Christ and all your problems are going to be solved? Anybody hear that? Anybody that was disappointed and you found out it wasn't true? There's a verse in 2 Corinthians 5:17. If anyone is in Christ, he's a new creature. Old things are passed away. All things have become new. And we accept Christ. We turn around twice, and they're the same old habits, same old problems, same old things. We say, what in the world does that mean? Well, I don't know. I've been studying that verse for a long time. I still don't know what it means. Except that the verse before it helps us a bit. It says that once we looked at everything from a human point of view, now once we have turned to Christ, we are looking at things from Jesus' point of view, and everything has changed. So I think it has to do with our point of view more than the circumstances of our lives. But well-meaning pastors and teachers will often fix on a verse like this and say, okay, now you're in Christ. All of that stuff that happened in your life is behind you, and so you don't have to worry about it. If you had wounds, then Jesus automatically heals them. If you had anger and resentment, then Jesus automatically takes that away. And so they take this verse and they say, forget those things that are behind. Well, first of all, it doesn't work for most of us. Secondly, it's the wrong use of that verse, because one of the rules that we learn in interpreting Scripture is you must always interpret the verses in context. And if you look at the context of this verse, you find that Paul is he's using the language of a runner on the track, and he's saying that I am pressing forward, I'm running towards the victory that I have in Jesus Christ. And if you look at the verses before it, there's 12 verses before it. In order to press on for this victory, I've got to forget all the victories that I've won in the past. I've got to forget all the medals, all the ribbons, all the races, all the successes. Otherwise, I'm going to lose this one. Think of a trackman. He's running. All of a sudden, he sees the crowd. He says, oh, I'm going to show him my medals. So he stops and shows him the medals and the ribbons. And what happens to the race? Paul says, that's not going to happen to me. What's going to happen to me is all of these great things. And he brags in the beginning of the thing. He said, well, if anybody has anything to brag about, look at me. I'm a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin, one of the two faithful tribes. As far as zeal is concerned, I'm a Pharisee. Remember, the Pharisees were the ones where they fasted twice a week. They did all kinds of things that made them... Actually, these were the people who were most like Jesus in their behavior. Except that Jesus points out that their motivation was wrong. Okay, you fast twice a week. Great. But why do you paint your faces so that everybody will notice that you're fasting? Why do you make your cheeks look hollow and so that you look so miserable, so that everybody will know that you're fasting? And Jesus says at one point, men honor you, that's your reward. Don't expect any further reward in heaven. You've had your reward here. And so Jesus is kind of hard on the hypocrisy of these people who were the evangelicals of their day. They were the ones who behaved most like Jesus was recommending. But Paul says, all of this zeal that I practiced as a Pharisee, all of these things that I might brag about, I count them as rubbish. And I won't tell you what the Greek word means. It's a lot stronger than our word rubbish. I count them all as rubbish, so that I can press forward and win this race. Okay, so we do away with that bit of teaching, that we're supposed to just forget the stuff that lies behind. And we can ask the question, okay, how did Jesus treat people who were hurting down deep? John 8. You remember some men dragged a woman to Jesus. They'd caught her in the act of adultery. Now, this is pretty bad. One of the problems, though, I suppose if they caught her in the act of adultery, they caught somebody else in the act of adultery. And there's no record that they dragged the man to Jesus. Part of the unfairness that a lot of us experience in this whole thing. But anyway, they had a right, if they caught somebody committing adultery, they had a right to stone her. And so they dragged her to Jesus to see whether Jesus would uphold the law or not. And you remember, Jesus was writing in the sand, and they said, well, what do we do? And Jesus simply said, the one that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone. It's interesting. In that group, there was one without sin, and he too refused to cast a stone. Now, a lot of times people say, well, you kind of, when you're doing inner healing, you kind of try to dramatize things and you try to picture and so on. But Jesus creates a drama. He creates a very effective drama. He doesn't get preachy. Did she need to be reminded of her sin? No. And in fact, we notice that most of the people that come to us, they usually don't need to be reminded of sin. They usually don't need to be reminded of hurt. They're ready to deal with it. And this woman was ready to deal with it. And so Jesus frees her from her condemners, and then says this wonderful thing. And this is one of the verses that comes down to us through history. Says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." And that's the first time he mentions sin. And he trusts her. Is that inner healing? My guess is that she got healed way down deep because she met the Master who, instead of condemning her, showed her love. Which is in keeping with what Jesus said. Even the Son of Man didn't come into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be rescued, might be saved. Or think of John 21. How would you have felt if you were Peter and you just seen your best friend taken and crucified? A guy that you were sure was the Messiah. You had devoted 3 years of your life to him. And then in the moment that he needed you most, you turned your back on him and denied him, not once, not twice, but 3 times. How do you suppose Peter felt? My picture is that Peter felt so bad that the resurrection was not good news for him. Remember, the ladies went to the tomb, they say, "He's gone, he's risen." They came and told Peter, and Peter probably said, "Oh no, he's come back to get me." Probably the last one he wanted to face in the whole world was the one that he had let down so badly. Especially after the promises he'd made. All these others might leave you, but not me. And then he let him down really bad. Now, Jesus didn't have to talk to him about guilt. He didn't have to talk to him about betrayal. He, again, creates a kind of a dramatic type of a thing. He builds a fire on the beach. It's kind of interesting. It mentions the coals in that fire. There's only one other reference to those coals, and that's back where Peter denied Jesus. So there's a parallel. And then what does Jesus do? He knows he has to work with Peter in threes. 3 denials, 3 times the same question. And I think Peter is waiting to be kicked out of the kingdom. I think he fully expects Jesus to discipline him, to say, "Okay, you've had it." Now, Peter's already made a career choice. Remember, he says, "I'm going back fishing." That was a career choice. That wasn't just, I'm going to take the afternoon off. He said, "I'm going to return to fishing. I can handle fish. I just can't handle human beings." Kind of thing. Jesus said you were going to be a fisher of human beings, and he'd gone back on it. But Jesus says, "Do you love me?" "Yes, I love you." He tells him something to do. "Do you love me?" "Yes, I love you." Tells him something to do. And again the 3rd time, and he trusts him. Well, there's these kinds of stories in the Scriptures that indicate that, well, first of all, you don't just forget things. There wasn't any recommendation on Jesus' part, either for the woman caught in adultery, or for Peter, or for the woman at the well, or for any number of other people that he showed tenderness and love. There wasn't a bit of saying to them, just forget what you've done. No, the events, even the dramatization of the thing and the ability to picture it, he's very aware, and the person that he's dealing with is very aware of the failure of the problem. And Jesus is like, he treats them like we treat little kids. The little kids trying to learn how to walk, We don't go over and say, "Dumb kid, guy, you're never going to learn how to walk." Anybody treat your kids like that? A lot of times we treat church people that way. What we do is we reach down and lift them up. That's the good news. What's the bad news? You're going to fall again, huh? And so Jesus reaches down and lifts Peter. This is what inner healing is all about. It's about being loving and tender and finding the stuff that's crippling us, getting into that garbage, and bring healing. Now, the healing, I think, is sometimes misunderstood. I've got a scar on my hand here, and if you're in the front row, you can see it. It's a pretty long scar. It reminds me of something that happened 65 years ago. But you know, it hasn't hurt for 65 years? Now, that's pretty good, isn't it? Now, in contrast to open wounds that continue to hurt, we have scars that don't hurt anymore. Why? They got healed. Now, this reminds me of something, of an event that hurt really badly. But like I said, it doesn't hurt anymore. The point is, Jesus doesn't erase from our memory the things that happen. And He doesn't change the things that happen. You can't go back in history and say, that event, I want to unhappen it. I want it to be, I just want it to be out of here. No. Because Jesus knows what we need to learn, and that is, it's not the event that hurt, it's the response to the event that hurt. And that response can be healed. And that's what we're all about. Healing of responses, healing of damage that has come to us because we responded maybe in a fairly normal way, but we hung on to that bitterness, we hung on to that anger, we hung on to that hatred that we should have let just go right through our system and out. Now, a lot of us have received healing from various kinds of things that have happened to us, and what we find is there's still some sadness. I share with quite a number of you sadness that my home wasn't more ideal. I had a distant father. He was distant at that time. I love him dearly now. We've been able to work through it. But I'm sad that he was a great athlete, and I wanted to be just like him. And he didn't spend any time teaching me. But the sadness is not crippling. Hanging on to anger and hatred and bitterness, those things cripple. Those are what I mean, the open wounds. Those things will tie us in knots. But when there's healing, when there's been forgiveness, and we go on with our lives on the basis of the forgiveness rather than on the basis of anger or hatred or bitterness or resentment, that reaction has been healed, turned into a scar, and it doesn't hurt anymore. Another analogy that I'd like to use, and I'm going to ask Judy to. Oh, okay. Judy and Debbie, you can come over here. We got a few balloons here, and I'll use another example about the balloons, but we can't do that here. The question I want to ask is, when you're swimming and you have balloons or balls with air in them, how many of them can you hold underwater at the same time? You see why we can't use that analogy here, so we're going to do a little different. Any of you can hold one, right? 2? 5? Depends on the size. Size of your hand, probably. Huh? How many of you can hold 100 balls underwater at the same time? I can tell you how to do it. Yeah, you just puncture them is all. You can hold 200 balls underwater if you puncture them. But see, look at here's these things. We're piling them on Debbie here, and here's one unforgiveness. Well, that's okay. We get that one, and here's rage and hatred. Anger. Where's anger? Oh, she got anger. Hey, you dropped hate. And unforgiveness and bitterness here. Okay. And jealousy. Okay.
And here's envy.
Envy.
You dropped hate.
Oh, you keep dropping them.
You got bitterness.
Okay. Now what happens is, I think they got the point. Thank you very much. What happens is we have these reactions, hatred or bitterness or jealousy or envy or whatever it is. We didn't go through the popping of them, but and we, like good adults, when we're hurt, we stuff them. And you just keep stuffing them and stuffing them and stuffing them. And what happens? How many of you as adults have ever acted like children? See? Something triggers some long-forgotten memory, something that is quite unconscious, and all of a sudden, boop, up pops a reaction, and what do you say? Where did that come from? What is it that made me act like that? And sometimes it's in a public situation, and you're kind of embarrassed by the whole thing. But psychologists tell us that when we stuff those things, they're not healed; they're simply stuffed. And those are the things that all of a sudden bounce up when we least expect it. And so that's why when we're dealing with inner healing, we're trying to deal with those down deep things. And those of you that have gone through inner healing and dealt with those down deep things, you find they don't pop up anymore. The things that used to trigger these reactions don't trigger them anymore, and your reaction, your wound has been turned into a scar, and so there's no more hurt. Now, to further draw the picture here, I want to talk about two levels of healing. You may have noticed when we talk about deep level, what's the other end of that analogy? If we have a deep level, we also have what? Surface level. Okay. Now we're thinking of our lives as like a stream of water flowing along, and there's the surface of our lives, and then there's the deep part. And as I've said several times, we're going to focus on the deep part. But what we mean by surface level healing is physical healing. Some problems are just physical. As I mentioned, most of the problems that have a physical manifestation have a deeper rooting, and so we go after that. So we'll say surface level healing is simply ministering healing to a surface level physical problem. Somebody sprains his ankle, or falls down and scrapes something, or whatever, or has indigestion or something. These can be just surface level problems, although we find that a lot of them also have deeper roots. I was doing a seminar one weekend, and during that weekend, two women came for ministry, each of whom had been in a very serious traffic accident and had back problems. And one of them told me that she'd been out of work for about 6 weeks and didn't know when she could get back because she couldn't maneuver with her with her back the way it was. And that's obviously a physical problem, and we knew that it was brought on by the automobile accident, and our temptation would be to simply lay hands on her and pray for the physical problem, except that I'm usually a little skeptical that a problem like that is simply physical. The reason I was skeptical in this case was I know that our body is made so that when an injury happens, the body starts immediately to bring healing. And 6 weeks was kind of a long time for not very much healing to happen naturally. So my suspicion was that there was something in her emotional life, probably, perhaps spiritual, but there was something in the deep sections of her life that was hindering the healing that her body was set up to do. In another case, and I'll come back to this one in a moment, another case, a woman had been playing volleyball and had fallen and just really wrecked her right leg. And she got fixed up immediately, and then when she went back 2 or 3 weeks later for the doctor's examination, the doctor said, "Good grief, you're worse now than you were when you first came in." Well, that tells you something about the person's internal workings. And so we ministered inner healing to her also, and she didn't need her crutches when she left. But back to the one with the accident, instead of simply dealing with this as a physical problem, I went back and started asking about childhood experiences and these kinds of things. And in about an hour and a half or so, a number of things came up, and God ministered to her in a marvelous way. And then she started wiggling her back. She said, "Oh, there's no more pain there." And I said, "Can you touch your toes?" She said, "Well, I used to be able to." And I said, "Do it." I said, "See if you can make it hurt." Well, you never saw anybody go so slowly down to her toes. She was just afraid that there was going to be some pain or whatever. She got all the way down, and she smiled, and she jumped back up again. And I said, "Do it again." She said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." She thought once was all she could do it. And she did it again. I said, "See if you can make it hurt." And she couldn't make it hurt. Clear indication that when we dealt with the inner stuff, actually we never prayed for her back. God probably said, "Okay, if you've gone this far, finish it off," kind of thing. A lot of times when we've done the inner stuff, you need to pray for the physical problem as a physical problem as well. But in this, actually, in both of these cases, we didn't have to do that. But that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. Okay, so we've got surface level healing, and that's fine. But most of the stuff on the surface is related to deep stuff, and at the deep level, we're talking about relationships. And we're talking about 3 kinds of relationships: relationship to God, relationship to others, and relationship to self. And these are the things that keep coming up over and over and over and over again. And the basic thing to find out early in ministry is there any unforgiveness? Anybody here that's ever gotten angry at God and is willing to admit it? We know it's okay because that's what Job did. And God didn't strike Job with lightning or whatever after that first time, and we know from the beginning of Job what the reason for that was. But Job was pretty angry at God. I think his patience has been very much overestimated, because he's saying all kinds of things. If I could only meet with God. And you get to the end of the book, and God says, "Job, you got something to say?" And Job says, yeah, I have a few complaints. And God's answer is, Job, were you there when I created the world? Did I ask your advice? Did I ask you how to put the stars in the places and the moon and the sun and all these things? Well, no. Come to think of it, you didn't ask me. Do you think I'm going to ask you the way I run your life? Well, okay. And I don't know how you read the book of Job, but I kind of get into it emotionally. I'm saying, oh God, please, you put this guy through so much. Wouldn't you be kind to him for a change? But he isn't. He says, shut up and obey. Job says, okay. Now all of us, we like to quote that verse, he's the potter and we're the clay, mold us and make us after your will. We sing that song. The problem is we all want to be flower pots. How many of you would just soon be a toilet bowl? Which does he need more of? Okay, it's okay to be angry at God, but you got to give it up. Because if you don't, it'll get you. Your attitude will be something that the enemy can get a hold of, and he'll take advantage of it, and he will cripple you and wreck your life. Because when we disobey God by hanging on to our anger towards him, we are automatically obeying the enemy, and he gets us. He doesn't miss a trick. So in ministry, one of the first issues is, how you doing with God? And a lot of us, we may have sin problems, although most of the people that come to us have pretty well taken care of the sin problems. I'll usually say, do you have any unconfessed sin? And usually they don't know of any, and so that one's cleaned up. But quite a few people are angry at God because they'll say something like, if God loved me, then he wouldn't have let this happen to me. One dear lady, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. She said, why does God hate me that I had to be born into a Satanist family? And she was sexually abused probably 500 times before age 12. And this had just devastated her whole psyche. And I honestly don't know the answer to that, except that when God gives free will, as he's given free will, he doesn't take it back. And there are lots of things going on in the world that God didn't plan and doesn't want, didn't want and doesn't want, because he has limited himself in certain ways to human free will, and for reasons I don't understand, to the free will of Satan and his kingdom. But I did have to say to this woman, whatever your problems, and I've not experienced them at the depth that you've experienced them, and so I can't really blame you if you don't take my advice. But I do know if you don't give up your hatred towards God, you're in even worse trouble than when you were being sexually abused. And she eventually did. And that was a very, very big step for her. A very big step. The anger, we've got to admit it, even hatred. One woman recently with tears in her eyes, she said, I've squandered my last hope, I've cursed God. And I said, even that sin is not too big. God will accept you back if you admit it and give it to him, which she did. But this anger towards God is very, very prevalent and needs to be dealt with. Otherwise, the enemy has got us. Then our relationships with others. We get hurt by others. We won't tell. How many of you have anybody in your life that you just like to punch his lights out? Okay. Now this is secret. Don't anybody tell. Yes. Revenge, right? Now, I believe in revenge because I've seen it. I believe we have a right to revenge. Somebody hurts us. That gives us a right to get back at them. The only problem is if we do it, we get crippled. Because that gives the enemy rights. These rules of the universe in the spiritual area they're just as firm as the law of gravity. Suppose I say, I don't believe in the law of gravity. So I'm just going to jump out of this fourth story window and it won't affect me because I don't believe in it. That's a postmodern approach to life, isn't it? We create our own reality. And my reality does not allow for the law of gravity. What happens if I step out of that fourth story window? I prove once again that the law of gravity works whether I believe in it or not. And I believe there are spiritual rules that are just as firm as that. A lot of them I don't think we know. We're trying to figure them out, trying to figure out just what, if this happens, what goes on. As I was saying in the last lecture, you look at a passage like that 2 Kings 3 passage. The king sacrifices the second most important person in the kingdom. That empowers Satan, and Israel is whipped. I think that's a law of the universe. Why did God require sacrifices all the way through the Old Testament? Okay, there was obedience, that was one issue, but there seems to be a spiritual law that he was empowered by people who, performed these sacrifices. Then, of course, the greatest sacrifice of all, which incidentally parallels that 2 Kings 3 thing. Remember, it was the son of the king that was sacrificed. Now we've got the Son of God, the King, sacrificed, releasing so much spiritual power. Remember at the crucifixion and the resurrection, people jumped out of their graves. There was so much spiritual power released at that time. An incredible kind of a thing. Okay, now we've got people who have hurt us. We would dearly like to take revenge on them, or maybe we kind of clean it up. We say, well, I don't want to take revenge on them, but I'd sure like to see them get what's coming to them. Oh, I had the most fascinating ministry session with a woman one time. A guy named Larry had hurt her. I never found out what he had done to her. I can only guess, but she hated his guts. And she sat there and she gritted her teeth. She said, I can never, 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 never forgive Larry. And I said, well, okay, what would you like to do to him? Would you like to kill him? She said, no, that wouldn't be bad enough for him. Okay. How about torture? Let's think about torture. Can we think about let's see, Chinese water torture, or pulling his fingernails out by the roots, or putting him on one of these things that stretches you till you break, or whatever. She couldn't think of anything bad enough for him. Would you call that anger? It was really something. And she said, I just want to see him get what's coming to him. Oh, okay. I said, do you want what's coming to you? And she said, no. Just Larry. So you want mercy for yourself and judgment for him, right? Yeah, that's right. Well, I said, unfortunately for you, God doesn't work that way. God says that if you don't forgive him, then God doesn't forgive you. Now, if there's anything in the Bible that's scary, it's that. I sure hope God is generous on that one. I like to think, remember somebody asked Mark Twain, what about those parts of the Bible you don't understand? He said, those aren't the parts that bother me. The parts that bother me are the parts I do understand. And over again, in the Lord's Prayer, see, if we don't forgive people, when we say the Lord's Prayer, we curse ourselves. We say, forgive us our sins. Now, the translators, they messed it up and made it a little easy. Forgive us our debts. Very serious mistranslation. It means forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And so, if we're not willing to forgive people, then we are calling God's judgment on us for not doing what He said we should do. And then at the end of the Lord's Prayer, the only part that Jesus comments on is the forgiveness part. If we don't forgive those who have hurt us, then God does not forgive us. Well, I'm saying this to this young woman, and I'm saying, okay, you've got a right to revenge, but can you get revenge on Larry? She thought for a while and said, no, I don't even know where he is. Okay, so you can't, you hate his guts, and you can't get revenge on him. And even if you could, you can't think of anything bad enough for him. You're really in a pickle, aren't you? You got a problem. And then I said, Jesus knew this kind of problem. And He said, give Larry to me. And she said, he'll probably just forgive him. And I said, well, that's a risk that we have to take. But he forgave you, right? And if he does forgive Larry, it'll be on the same basis that he's forgiven you. You see the whole thing? And finally, I'm saying, how bad do you want to get well? Is Larry worth your destroying yourself over him? No, he's not worth anything. Okay, so you can't get back at him. The only thing you can do if you hang on to your hatred is destroy yourself. Is he worth it? No. Then why don't you give up what is destroying you? See, there's two people here. One of them you probably can't fix. The other one you can. That's you. Now, it's that kind of thing that we're saying with regard to parents. A lot of us have been badly treated by our parents. And it's sort of like we're going through life with hatred of our parents, around our necks. I remember one guy, I said, in ministry, I said, I kind of have this picture that you've got this big load on your shoulders. And I said, would you like to give it to Jesus? He said, I can't. I said, what do you mean? He says, I'm holding on to the ropes. He said, there's ropes around it and I'm holding on to them. Oh, okay. Wouldn't you like to let go of those ropes? I said, oh, okay. So he let go of the ropes and gave the burden to Jesus. But when we have hatred and bitterness and anger and resentment and so on, we usually cannot get back at the other person. So Jesus says, give it to me. And he says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, trust me. Now there's another thing. We say Jesus died for our sins. I believe he also died for our hurts. Died to free us from these reactions, these emotions and so on. So forgiving and giving these who have hurt us to Jesus. And then there comes the relationship to yourself. How many of you will admit to not liking yourself? I lived with self-hatred for a good 50 years. Now, my self-hatred was rooted in the fact that my parents were not married when I was conceived. And so the first signals that I got in my mother's womb were signals of rejection. Now, unfortunately, all of us as kids assume that our parents know what they're doing. Most of us have learned otherwise by now, right? We get our own kids and we say, I guess my parents didn't know what they were doing because I don't know what I'm doing. So we assume that our parents know what they're doing. So if we're feeling rejection from them, then it must be because there's something wrong with us. And I don't know why God made us this way, but the way we're made is that victims ordinarily blame themselves. And whether it's back in the womb, or whether it's in childhood and before school, or whether it's in school, or whether there's abuse. There undoubtedly are people here that have been very severely abused, maybe sexually abused, physically abused, emotionally abused by parents, by teachers, by friends, by relatives. And we get the impression because somebody grown up has abused us, misused us, we get the impression that we must be no good. Because they must know what they're doing, and they wouldn't treat us this way if there was anything good to us. And in fact, perpetrators often say, I'm doing this for your own good because you're bad. And this is a way of purging your badness or something like that. You get all kinds of stuff like that. Now, one of the problems that we face that is a very deep problem is assigning the blame where it really belongs. As I was growing up, feeling rejected, feeling especially that my father didn't care for me, somewhere along the line my mother told me a bit about what my father's life was like when he was young. And at the time that she told me, it kind of registered in my mind, but I didn't know the full significance of it until I got into this kind of ministry and began to realize that my father was neglecting me. It was probably more neglect than rejection. He was neglecting me out of his own hurt, out of his own problems, not because of my problems. Now that's a tough thing for us to sort out oftentimes, but when there's abuse, we need to be helped oftentimes to realize that that abuse came out of the problems of the abuser rather than out of our problems. And to recognize that the sin was theirs, that the problem was theirs, that we don't have to carry the responsibility and the guilt and the shame that goes along with that. Now, very often when we are victimized and shamed in the process and hang on to that shame and start believing things like we're no good, we're just dirty old dish rag, we don't have a right to be here, this kind of thing, then we very frequently find a demon of shame comes in with rights to us to increase the guilt and the shame. But our relationship with ourselves is a crucial one. I've had lots of trouble trying to love myself. In fact, there have been times in my life when I thought it was more spiritual to not love myself because I'm no good. In my upbringing, we heard a lot about sin, about our sinfulness, and we very easily heard sinful as worthless. And so we turned in, and the enemy was able to use even good, solid biblical preaching to help us to focus on the sin part rather than the redemption part. And so we turn in on ourselves, and self-hatred gets to be a very big problem for a lot of us. And the enemy really, really loves that.